Let me draw your attention, sir, to the press statement of the Indian Home Secretary on the eve of this dialogue. Tell me to what extent that helped. It has been reported in all the papers of Pakistan today, and I think we discussed it, and we are both of the opinion it was uncalled for.
The Home Secretary spoke the truth. The Home Secretary did convey whatever Headley had confessed, whatever Headley had told our interrogators when a team of them went to United States. I have absolutely no problem with that. I can live with that. But the only question was the timing, you know.
I think both sides have to see that it's in their mutual interests to engage in dialogue and in meaningful dialogue. What we've had in the recent past is that increasingly it's becoming evident that dialogue is being undertaken under the tutelage of the United States because of strategic compulsions that the United States is facing in Afghanistan, which makes it imperative that they should somehow pacify the situation in Pakistan, and for that they require India to be also involved in the process and to give some meaningful, substantive concessions to Pakistan to justify its continuing in this American orbit. Now, if you come down to the real key issues, then there are three which you could probably identify, which are Kashmir, Siachen, and Sir Creek. India has a definite interest in engaging with Pakistan because, for instance, just to take one of the less contentious ones, Sir Creek, it's an issue of demarcating the maritime boundaries, and it's a matter of vital importance for large fishing communities on the coastline. But unfortunately, these fishing communities do not have much of a voice in political affairs on either side of this border. So they just get lost in the din of India-Pakistan talks. And there are hundreds, scores of fishermen languishing in prison on either side. And because of the ambiguity of the maritime border, so if their interests were to be foregrounded, then India would have a sense of urgency in pursuing this matter with Pakistan. But unfortunately, it is not. And that is how the reality of politics is. Sure. Similarly with Siachen, I think the issue is of mutually verifiable withdrawal from the heights. Now, India is holding the heights, so India sees that it has no particular incentive to withdraw. But if you look at the human costs and the military costs and the financial costs of that occupation of the heights, these are enormous, and India definitely should rethink its 25-year occupation of those heights. And mutually verifiable withdrawal shouldn't be a problem for us, because just last week we heard about 5 cartosats being put into orbit by the space agency, which give us virtually 24 hours surveillance over the entire Indian landmass. So it shouldn't be a problem from our side. It could be a problem for Pakistan. We have an 8-point agenda for the talks, and if you remember, Jammu and Kashmir is one item and peace and security is another item. And there was a conscious decision that 6 of these items will be discussed separately from these 2. Now the point is that we keep foundering at the first of these 2 and are unable to cross over into the rest of those issues. Pakistan, I'm sure, would be keen to address that, provided it does not risk seriously destabilizing their internal politics. Now, the fact of the matter is that Pakistan is suffering from an even greater upsurge of terrorist activities since the last 2 years than we have, and including the attack last week on their iconic mosque in Lahore, which is kind of emblematic of their cultural identity. So, and not to mention the attacks on the general headquarters and the ISI premises and so on. So there is a serious problem that they're facing. Now, it's in their interest to clamp down on this, but how far they can go without provoking a kind of violent upsurge, that is probably entering into their calculations. And also the question of the resources that they have and how far their intelligence capabilities can cope with the magnitude of the problem. But I think the issue of transparency also has to be addressed, even when issues of national security are concerned. For instance, we are told that there's a gentleman called David Headley, who was operative of the Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist grouping and who is now in US FBI custody. And India made a long effort to get access to him, finally did manage to get access to him. After initially the indications were that we would not, our agencies would not have access to him. And apparently now he has named 2 handlers of his who are ranking officers in the inter-services intelligence. We have to really question who this person Headley is, because from all that is known in public, he's been an informer for the Drug Enforcement Agency in the US, and he's spent time in Pakistan in that capacity, and at the same time he's also apparently, allegedly, undergone arms training with the Lashkar-e-Taiba. So he's obviously had a very complex and very ambiguous kind of past. And who are the masters that he served and for what purpose? We really need to know more about these things. And I don't think much is going to be lost by being transparent in these matters. They will have to sort out their internal consultative processes to make these talks meaningful in some sense. And just prior to the meeting with the foreign minister, our foreign minister, Mr. Shah Mehmood, the Qureshi, had said that Musharraf's deliberations are totally irrelevant and they'll have no bearing on what we are about to discuss. Now, the whole point is, again, I come to the issue of transparency, because very little is known about what Musharraf talked about with whoever the interlocutor was on this side. And there have been some straws in the wind that have emerged. We know, for instance, that access across the line of control for the people of Jammu and Kashmir was one of the issues discussed, making that border increasingly permeable so that people could cross over. Cross-border trade, cross-LOC trade rather, was also an issue. And I think, if we are transparent about these things, I don't think there's going to be any serious objection to these matters being put on the agenda. Because we've had 3 years, 3 summers, 3 successive summers of enormous civil disturbances in Kashmir. And all of these have been, have proven that our ability to control public sentiment there is progressively being eroded. And this is not surprising, because a whole generation has grown up under the rule of Khaki, under seeing virtual occupation of the valley. So this is the language that they're familiar with, and they're responding in ways that they are used to. So if we can start another process of engagement with civil society in Kashmir, and we need Pakistan's cooperation in that, and we need also to make meaningful gestures of reconciliation in that bargain. We cannot continue saying that this is an internal matter, because fact of history is that it's not. Well, yeah, it's good that you brought up the issue of the media, because the media flourishes with its kind of speculative reporting, where there is some kind of a embargo on information. If the information is available freely and transparently, then there's very little scope for that. And the more speculative reports that are put out by the media, the more public opinion is primed for all the adverse kind of reactions to some positive movement forward in the talks. But yes, I think Kashmir has been on the agenda for long, but for long India's only proposition on Kashmir was that Pakistan should seize cross-border terrorism in Kashmir. And then Pakistan came up with the counter-proposal that yes, you withdraw forces from there, demilitarize the towns, and we'll ensure that so then India read this as a tacit admission that Pakistan is responsible for the terrorism. So, every time there is a seemingly constructive movement from one side, the worst possible motives are read into it by the other side. So that trap of mutual suspicion is something that we really have to get out of if we want to make any forward movement. I think both sides need to have an exercise in statesmanship that steps beyond calculations of some riotous behavior by mobs on the streets on both sides. And both sides need to bring in the most progressive elements in civil society into the bargain, and to ensure that these people's voices are heard rather than the voices of the extremists. So far we've had the extremists on both sides exercising a right of veto over the progress of talks between India and Pakistan. We should do away with that power of veto, and the only way to do that is to bring in the sensible, sane voices for peace.